This episode of the Henry's Uncle podcast is brought to you by donations from our generous supporters. If you love the Henry's Uncle podcast and want to support us and our nonprofit, please go to henrysuncle.org and click the donate button and or give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Thank you for your continued support. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking with Dustin. Dustin is a person in long-term recovery from meth. He talks about growing up in an abusive household, his addiction to meth, his recovery, relapse, and recovery again. It's a pretty incredible story of overcoming so much trauma. Take a listen. So today we have a wonderful guest, Dustin, who Amanda Heminger actually told me about, said you have to have Dustin on, share his story. It's an amazing story. So I'm really glad, Dustin, you came on and to share your story. And, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Dustin. I am in recovery, and that's pretty much a good introduction right there for me.
Perfect. No, exciting. So before we get into your story, I kind of want to talk about your upbringing and, your family, all that kind of stuff and where you grew up. So to kind of give a little background.
Yeah, so I grew up in Everett, Washington. It's right outside Seattle, Washington, and lived in the same house pretty much most of my life. And then junior year of high school, moved to Los Angeles for a few years with my family, and then I've been back ever since.
So pretty normal upbringing, nothing out of the blue or ordinary or?
No, my upbringing is not pretty normal. Like pretty dysfunctional family, pretty big family. I have lots of brothers and sisters, and there was a lot of chaos in the house, a lot of police arrests in the house growing up, a lot of traumatic stuff happening.
Really? You don't mind me asking, is that due to substances or just?
Well, my mom escaped an abusive marriage when I was just a newborn baby, and took me and my brothers and my older sister, and she got remarried and she hid out from my dad for a few years. My dad ended up finding us and getting partial parental custody on the weekends, and so that was really weird because of their abusive relationship. We would have to go to the police station on Fridays and on Sundays to be swapped out. So that was pretty messed up.
Wow. How old were you then?
I was not even 4 when my dad found us, and I remember not even thinking he was my dad and telling him that my stepdad was my dad, and yeah, it was pretty weird.
That is very strange. I've heard a couple of these stories, through different podcasts actually, where, ex-wife, escapes an abusive relationship and tries to hide out their kids. And then, the father finds them and they get parental custody or, part-time, like you just mentioned. It's so baffling that happens. I'm terribly sorry to hear that. So that is, I couldn't even imagine, being 4 or 5 and your stepdad is your dad, like you said, or you think it is. And then your biological father shows up and you have to go to the police station to hang out with your dad for the weekend or, get swapped to go to your dad. So do you have pretty vivid memories of that?
Yeah, I remember it because it was just so unusual. And I hated going to my dad's on the weekends for lots of reasons. He was pretty abusive in lots of different ways. And so.
Was that to all your siblings or one in particular or?
I mean, he'd hit us all with belts or with his hands, but he sexually abused me in different ways. But yeah, so I dealt with that until I was in 5th grade, and then I spoke out, and he ended up going to jail and wasn't allowed to see us no more. And after that, my brothers, they got pretty mean and pretty terrible on drugs. And yeah, hating me because my dad was an assistant coach to all of our baseball teams, in Little League and stuff. And so everyone kind of knew who my dad was. And my brothers were pretty terrible after that, probably because, we were all embarrassed. He couldn't be a coach. We stopped playing sports like baseball. And
sure. Oh my God. I am terribly sorry. I can't even imagine the amount of courage it takes for 11-year-old to speak up about his father doing what you mentioned. So I'm very sorry about that. And how old were you at in the sibling?
I have a brother who didn't grow up with us that my mom put up for adoption, and he's 9 years older. And then there's my sister Nicole, who's 7 years older. And then my 2 brothers, one is 3 years older, one is 2 years older. And then there's me. And then my mom and my stepdad, well, now ex-stepdad, they have my little sister and my little brother, and they had them when I was my preteen or teenage years.
Okay. So the brothers you're talking about are just a few years older, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I can definitely relate, just kinda because I was growing up in this, playing sports, baseball, football, whatever it may be, and, your coaches are you're kind of around them year round and stuff, so you become very familiar, and so your dad goes away. Did your brothers blame you for that, or was it just more embarrassment from what happened?
I feel like they blamed me for that, but I mean, they didn't outright like blame me. Like my brother, who's 2 years older, like I mean, he like when I was like 7 years old, I remember like one morning he was like at the breakfast table at my dad's like house. He was like, "Hey, I woke up last night and I saw dad." And so like I mean, he was very like he knew, and so like I feel like he was traumatized from seeing that as well, and so. I mean, that does a lot of things to people. But my brothers were always mean to me after that. But who knows what the reason
Well,
was.
yeah, I can't even imagine going through that, and then I'm just like thinking about your brother as well, seeing that, and then how much that could, like you said, can traumatize someone, not knowing what to do. I mean, you're so young, you don't know it's your parent. You think what's right or wrong. So, well, again, takes a lot of courage to stand up and speak out, especially at the age of 11. So you mentioned your brothers after that kind of started getting into drugs and whatnot. After that whole episode occurred, what's going through your mind? Because I mean, you're 11.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember like going through like the trials and like missing school and like I remember I was in youth group, like I would go to church like for like a youth group like on Wednesdays and stuff, and I remember like it got out like about what was going on and like what my dad did, and I just remember being completely humiliated. I stopped going to that church for a while. Actually, I think I stopped going to that church altogether. I don't remember going to another church again until like middle school. It was just pretty embarrassing. And my mom, she didn't help. She played a victim. I mean, I love my mom so much, but I mean, she would tell anyone and everyone like at the schools like who would listen to her like this was done to her kind of thing.
She wanted the attention, sort of, like you're saying.
It seems so, yeah. It
Yeah,
seems
that is very. Oh wow, I'm sorry. So I mean, I again, I know I've repeated it 3 times. I can't even imagine going through that at any stage, but being so young.
right. So when I went to middle school to start like over and like, I'm like now in sixth grade, like the trial's done, like my dad's in jail, like all that. And then moving forward, my mom just like told like the principal there and like the assistant principal and all that too. And so it's like it followed me over. I'm just like, why would we even tell them anything?
Sure, I can see both sides as a parent wanting to make sure you're protected, but as a young kid, 11-year-old or 12, you don't want any of that just to be talked about. You just kind of want to start over and keep moving. So you're going through middle school now. Keep kind of just guiding us along of you trying to process all this and
Yeah, so in middle school, like, so in sixth grade, I acted out like pretty bad. Like, I was like smoking weed for a few months, trying to like fit in with my brothers who were like doing a lot of weed and a lot of other hard drugs, but they still didn't really like me hanging around, but they were into other stuff as well. And so I remember like hanging out with like a couple bad kids like in sixth grade. And like, like I was mean in sixth grade. Like, I didn't know like how to handle anything. Like I was making fun of like some people. I got suspended like a few times in sixth grade. It's pretty embarrassing, but then again, I'm a kid and I don't know like how to process anything that's going on in my life like right now. But seventh and eighth grade, I mean, I was like pretty much like a goody two shoes. Like I was ASB treasurer of like my middle school. I was super involved. I was like fighting super hard to get good grades while like I was allowing my brothers to be in and out of juvie, and they each got expelled from their middle school, which was a different middle school than I went to, like on purpose. Like I went to a different middle school than them.
what was the switch? Was it just switching schools for you or
So we lived like in the middle area, like where we could go to two different middle schools. And like they had gone to the middle school that I went to, but they got like in trouble there. So they ended up like going to a different middle school. And then I continued at the one middle school.
so, you said 6th grade, you were acting out quite a bit, and then 7th, 8th grade, getting good grades, you become the treasurer. What made you have that switch? Was it
I didn't want to be anything like the road I was heading on, like pretty early on. Like I saw like I mean the way I was acting, and like I didn't want to be like my siblings. I didn't want to be any of that. Like and so like early on I fought to like kind of be a goody two shoes. And like I mean I also fought to be like my mom's best friend too. And like she wanted like a good child. And so like I mean I became super close like with my mom and like.
Yep. No, I feel you there. So, you mean you had no therapy?
There was court appointed therapy for a while, but we did that as a family for a while, and then after we didn't have to no more, no, we didn't continue in counseling.
So no, like, individual therapy for you or anything like that?
I think I only had like a couple sessions like by myself, which was court like appointed or whatever.
Wow. So, yeah, I couldn't really. I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes, trying to go to family therapy when, like you mentioned, what happened to you, and then your brother's not liking you, all that kind of stuff. That's a lot to bear and try to talk about in therapy. I mean, that's a lot of emotion and trauma. I mean, that's insane. I'm terribly sorry that occurred at such a young age. So, eighth grade, and now you're in high school. Tell us a little more about high school then.
Yeah, so freshman and sophomore year, like I mean, I still like was in Everett, Washington, and I was like a class representative and working hard on like my grades and stuff because I always thought I would be like the first one to graduate high school out of my siblings and the first one to go to college, all that. So I made sure that my grades were super good. Meanwhile, I was doing like this door to door thing. I started working and saving up money from like the age of 11. Like it was like raising money for missing children. But to be honest, it's kind of like a scam because I mean, we got to profit like a lot of money. And I was doing that with my brothers. And I started doing that from like 11 to 15, like after school, earning money, saving it away for college and having my own money and whatnot. And my mom let me. So I thought I was going to go to college. So I worked really hard, like in high school. And then junior year, my parents like upright like moved, like my mom and my stepdad moved me, my little brother and my little sister to Los Angeles to try to like get my little sister like into like, I don't know, modeling or acting, whatever they were trying to do, live the dream. And that really messed with me too, like moving me from my whole life, like where I lived for like 14 years. And then all of a sudden I'm in Los Angeles. Senior year of high school, like I got a job at Walgreens. I was working graveyard because I just turned 18. And like I only had half a year to complete because I did like all the extra credits, like Saturday school, summer school, just for extra credits so I could graduate sooner. And then I got into drugs because I was going to high school after working graveyard shift. So I got into
Interesting.
meth, yeah, pretty strong.
Really?
Yeah.
So pretty much, I mean, here you are, you go through this trauma, you act out sixth grade and stuff, but then seventh, eighth grade, start getting good grades, you start seeing the future, you start seeing, high school, college, getting good grades, a life after that. And then so working graveyard at Walgreens, what was I guess the temptation, when working graveyard leading into drugs?
Senior year started and like my mom told me that there was no college fund. I always thought that I was going to be matched like in the money I had saved away. And so like there was no college fund. She was like, well, you get good grades, like you have a high GPA, like you can get scholarships and grants. And I'm just like, well, you need to start applying for that stuff pretty early on. So I was pretty upset, pretty devastated because I always thought that if I worked hard, like I was going to go to college. I especially like had money I had put away like a long time ago, years before for college, but like that got spent up and I didn't really know. So I got a job at the Walgreens across the street from our condo, but the only available shift was graveyard. And so I just thought I could do it all to save some money so I can do that. But I couldn't do that. It was impossible. Like I had high school like 40 minutes after I'd get off my shift. Like there's just no way to do that and not be on drugs. And so I did drugs and I failed miserably. I ended up dropping out of school because I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it all. I lost my job and I dropped out of school.
Wow. So here you are, senior year. You're basically 1 year away from college, what you've been thinking about, dreaming of, and you're working your ass off, graveyard shift. So that's what graveyards typically,
It
what,
was
11 to
11
7?
p.m. to 7 something a.m. Yeah.
Yeah. School starts at 8, 8:30, 8:20. So you're taking drugs in between that just to stay awake, basically.
Hmm.
Yep. Keep stimulating. Then again, you get off school, go do homework, do your thing, go to work. It's interesting because I just got done reading a book, Hillbilly Elegy, and it's been around for 4 or 5 years, and about a gentleman who grew up in the Appalachians and talking about the devastation there. But like he mentioned, when he was 18, they thought he had no life outside of high school because none of his friends or anyone around him or family went to college. But essentially, like he was so overwhelmed by all the college paperwork, the financial aid, the scholarships, whatever he could get, and made the decision just to go to the Marines, which for him said it took him, he got 4 years in the Marines, and he said, disciplined him, and it made him understand how to balance a checkbook, how to do this, the simple things right. And it relates here because it's I remember going, 18, 17, 18, and there's just so much stuff. Like, you're supposed to know what you're supposed to do with your life at that time, know what major you're going to get at when you're 18, all the paperwork you have to do, how are you going to afford this? There's a lot of pressure, and being that young, especially what you've already been through, it's a lot. It really is. And it's a lot of money. College ain't cheap. So you drop out of high school, go through graveyard shift, lose your job, you said, get into meth. What happens after that?
So, like I said, I mean, pretty quickly, like, I would show up to high school, and I would freak out like in the middle of class, and like everyone, it was just very apparent I was on drugs. And like, I remember like they showed up at my house like one day, like the counselors to the high school I was going to in Los Angeles County, and they were just like, your son's not showing up for school. Like, we think he's on drugs. And then my mom was just like, oh yeah, he won't leave his room. And like, it was just a traumatic experience. And they're like, well, you're 18, so you're actually technically like a dropout right now. And I'm like, no, I didn't mean to drop out. Like, and I'm just like devastated. They had like the school cop there with the guidance counselor. I don't know why, to protect him. Maybe it was really embarrassing, but yeah. So they told me that I'm a dropout and I'm no longer welcome like at the high school because I'm 18, and so they don't have to keep me like enrolled at that point. And so I had no job, and I just remember like I just started using drugs, and I continued on that path for a very long time.
How long?
So I was 18 years old, and then I ended up moving back to Washington when I was not even yet 20. So I lived in LA 17 to like 19 and a half. And then I came back, and I still continued to do drugs until the first time I went to rehab like 6 years ago. And then I ended up relapsing. So now I have a little over 4 years again.
Okay. Hey, don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
33.
33. Okay. So I mean, from what, 18 to, I'm just doing the math here, 29-ish, 28?
Yep.
With a few years of sobriety in there after their first recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I was only sober for like a year and 19 days before I got back into drugs again. Relapsed pretty hard for 10 and a half months, and then I've been clean since.
That's crazy. So, going through this, you're 18, you get devastated by this, college. I mean, it just kind of wiped you out, basically, working graveyard. You start taking drugs. What was going through your mind? What was that collapse like? Because, so many people just say, oh, people take drugs for, as a choice, right? Maybe at the beginning it's like that, but there is, and everyone I've talked to so far, and this has been so eye-opening to me, because I used to be like that. I used to
have judgments and
everything against, people using drugs. Cause again, it's, you grow up what you're taught, and everyone teaches you that it's a choice. They should stop, et cetera, so on. But, every person I've talked to who has gone through it and who's in recovery, there's always something they're trying to hide, or they're trying to suppress, or whatever it may be, just to numb. You're going through that. What were you, was there something you were trying to numb, or was it just a feeling of being a quote unquote dropout because of that's what the school said?
When I first started using, like, it was definitely a choice right at the beginning. I was trying to do it to stay awake so I can accomplish things that I wanted to do. But like, I lost all control. I mean, it was not a choice after that. It took over me. Like, I always judged drugs as well, and people who use, and I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to be like family members of mine who were like always loaded. And I hated drugs. I never thought I'd become a drug addict. In fact, it's just pretty incredible. So, but it opened my eyes. Like, I'm so much better now that I know that I can be more relatable and personable to all people. And it's truly a blessing for my life, because who knows, like, how close-minded and shut off I would be if I didn't go through everything I went through.
Yeah. I look back and, after my brother died, I didn't go through an addiction. As of now, cross my fingers and knock on wood, I just don't have that addiction, addictive personality. But, it's opened me into, just really a whole new realm. Because again, we've lost, this past year was 83,000 people we lost to drug overdose. And that, you're probably missing 15, 20,000 people in there who weren't, counted, if you want to call that. And, there's so many people going through it, whether, straight, gay, everything, there's so much going on in our country now, especially the pandemic, everything. It's just, like you said, it just really opened my eyes in terms of why people take drugs. And the sad part about the whole thing is how hard it is to get into treatment. It's definitely changed me for the better, for sure. His death changed me for the better to be more open, more empathetic, for people going through what they're going through, whether they're on drugs or not. So, was there any drug besides meth that you were on, or is it just meth because it was a stimulant and you just needed to be up?
Yeah, for me, it was just meth. I mean, I didn't even really ever drink. Like, I was a social drinker for a little bit, like going to a bar, like with a boyfriend. I'd have a drink and like I was such a lightweight on that, but I could do unlimited amounts of meth and like my tolerance was just so incredibly high. It's really remarkable that I'm like fully functioning today. If you think about it, like I could be brain dead or dead because man, I tell you.
Yeah. So for let's see, 18 to the first time you said you got in sick was 6 years ago. So 20. Oh, my math is terrible. 27. For those 8 years, what was it like? Were you still functioning, having a job, or was it just being homeless, or what was addiction like for you? Active addiction.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of ups and downs. So, like I said, I was back here, like in Washington State. I mean, I've always been attracted to guys, like as a child, but like I didn't. I had like a bad view of like gay people, and I think that has a lot to do like with my upbringing. And so I didn't explore that option until I was back in Washington after like using drugs, and I was like 19. And then I dated guys and girls for a little bit. And then, I dated guys and I got into some really bad relationships, bad because I was on drugs and I would try to hide it. And then also I had a really long relationship with someone like who abused me physically and sexually. And I was hiding from the law because I didn't go turn myself in from a warrant. And so now I can't work and I'm hiding out and I'm in an abusive relationship for a couple years. And yeah, it was just crazy. I became a person like I never thought I would be ever. Like I always thought I was just too strong-minded to be any of the person that I had become.
A lot of trauma in a matter of 25 years for someone.
A lot of trauma. But I mean, it shaped me, so I mean, I'm better for it.
Sure. So you mentioned you weren't sure, based on the early trauma you had in your life, whether to explore your sexuality, and then sort of dating guys and girls, and then now guys. Did you take drugs in terms of because you weren't comfortable with your sexuality at all, or did that really have no hindrance? Or
Yeah, I don't think that had a part to do with it. I mean, I was just hurt and drugs took over me. Like, I mean, I started using drugs, like I said, so I would be able to achieve so much more. But even after losing that, drugs just took over. It wasn't feeling shame for being attracted to guys. It wasn't that, which would make sense for a lot of people. But for me, that wasn't it. It was just I was hurting and like I couldn't stop using drugs, and it helped me to not feel all the pain for sure in lots of ways.
yeah, so I mean, you said you're taking drugs to numb the pain. Was it anything from your early childhood trauma that you were trying to numb, and you just never thought about and processed, or was it just really that meth just kind of just honestly just took over and
I mean, I would say all of it. Like, I mean, I had a lot of childhood trauma to deal with, and then I had a lot of trauma as an adult. Being in like such an abusive relationship for some years that like I stopped talking to family, I stopped talking to friends. I couldn't have friends. I couldn't have friends over in my home. There was lots of abuse. It was just
because of your partner?
yeah, it was an awful time. It was an awful time. The only thing I could do was drugs and be at home. I was hiding from the law. Again, like the contact I had with my family was non-existent at first because I wasn't allowed to. And then I was allowed to a little bit here and there. And it was just so apparent that I was being abused, but no one ever outright asked me. And then I remember one day my brother was like, "You're being abused, like, aren't you?" And I was just like, "No, how could you say that?" And he's like, "I'm not stupid. You're absolutely getting abused by this guy." And I'm just like, "No." It's crazy.
Yeah. How did that relationship end?
I use the word escape because I absolutely escaped. So I remember we got pulled over once and the cops were like, "You have a warrant. You've had an outstanding warrant for some years." And then so I ended up going to jail for a few months. And then after jail, well, during jail, I was like, I made arrangements to move in elsewhere and I was not going to return back to him. And then it was like a few days before I was released after like a 3-month sentence. He never came to see me in jail. And then he came to see me. He was sobbing and he was like, "Please come home after you're released. I'm clean and sober. Things are different." all of that. And I ended up agreeing. And so my other living situation, someone took that room. And so I had to go home. And then he didn't show up to pick me up at 2 a.m. when I was released. I ended up getting home to find out that he was like out in like a stolen car scene. That's why he couldn't come pick me up. And then I saw an eviction notice on our apartment door. But like I said, I wasn't working like before jail because I was like, on the run. And so like, I mean, it was his like apartment, but all this stuff like he kept from me. And there was a 3-day eviction notice and it was like 2 weeks old. So like when he showed up, I was just like, what is going on? And you need to call like the landlord. And they let us stay there for like about 3.5 weeks until we figured it out, until like the first of the following month. But we were definitely kicked out, and I didn't stay with him.
You just left?
Yeah, he was like, you're going to be homeless if you don't stay with me. But if you stay with me, I'll get us a place together. But if you don't, then I'm going to move into my parents' basement. And I was like, move into your parents' basement. And I was homeless for like a good 10.5 months, sleeping on a tree behind a community college, like on the dirt, no tent, just super homeless.
So you mean because that you had no job after jail or anything like that? You're just
No, I didn't even know how to get a job, especially with like no home. Like I couldn't like shower and prepare for a job. So it was just a terrible cycle. I ended up hearing about Salvation Army Rehab Center, and I ended up going to rehab because it never clicked for me. No one throughout all my years of using, like no one mentioned, hey, you need rehab. Like it just didn't click for me. I always thought treatment was out there for people who had parents who could pay for it or like good insurance. Like that was not my case, you know?
so you just felt hopeless basically the whole time. Like you knew treatment was there, but not in your situation.
Absolutely not in my situation when it completely is. It's incredible.
Okay, so I want you, I want you to talk about the Salvation Army because this will be the third time I think in the last 2 months I've heard about the recovery and Salvation Army, and it sounds absolutely incredible. So yeah, please tell us.
Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center or Adult Rehabilitation Program. It's a program that is like a work therapy program. So you go, you check in, you have to be able to pass like a UA, but that's only like needing like a couple days clean, you know. But once you like pass a UA, you can get into a program where you live, and it's 6 months till completion, but you can stay after that. There's like different phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And you go do like work therapy assignments like 5 days like a week, you know. So it helps you get back into like a working mode, and they like have you work in their thrift stores or like out on their trucks. And then afterwards there's counseling, different nights, there's 12-step programs, and it's incredible. It's a life changer. I still promote it all the time. Well, I mean, I'm a member of the Salvation Army Church now. So Salvation Army is a church. Most people think it's a thrift store, but it's a church with lots of services to help people. It's a program, the rehab program that you don't need to pay for.
That's so awesome. And the first part is you don't have to pay for it, but you work. And then it's a 6-month program, which is so different from many rehabilitation centers where it's typically, insurance will pay 30 days, which after talking to everybody on this podcast, the 30 days is just, it's nothing.
It's not enough. If you look at the statistics, 30 days, I mean, your likelihood of staying sober is not great, you know? Like after 30 days, I'm just waking up. I need an extensive program. Like, so 6 months to a year, I mean, the chances of staying clean and sober after that are just so much greater. Like, why would you not want that for yourself?
Exactly. And it's amazing. You see all the research and statistics and reports out there, and yet the law still states, your insurance will pay basically 30 days. And like everyone said, you're basically just waking up, you're just getting sober. And that's when like the real work begins. I think Amanda in her podcast, she mentioned it wasn't until, I could be wrong here, but like it wasn't until like month 3 or 4 where she just started gaining momentum each day. And for me, that was a big eye opener going, wow, 3 or 4 months, because there's so much in your brain just being rewired, and all the substances, what they've done to your body. It takes a long time. How long did you stay at Salvation Army?
7 months. I graduated at 6 months, and I stayed a month into phase 2, where like you're allowed to like look for job. I got back into school. I got a job, and I got in a clean and sober house within a month of phase 2. So I thought I was ready. I thought I was never going to use again, and I could take on the world. But after about a year being clean, so maybe like 5.5 months after I moved out of the rehab, I relapsed pretty hard for about 10 and a half months. I'm surprised I made it back without going to rehab, just taking what I used, from meetings and from the rehab center and all of that. And I got back connected again. And I have over 4 years now without going back to rehab because of my experience was so great that I just carried through.
What was the main, the main reason behind your relapse? Just you wanted to use, or you weren't ready, or
I tend to put like a lot of myself out there, like into my relationships. And I got into a relationship, even though it wasn't advised. Like they suggest that you don't get into a relationship like your first year of like sobriety. And I got into a relationship and he was an alcoholic. And like that was really hard because he was going to the bars and I wasn't, because I can't be in those situations. Like I know that about myself. And when we broke up, I was like pretty devastated. And then one of my mentors, who I knew from the Salvation Army, he passed away. And I just used it all to go out like one night and I acted out. And I thought I could literally use for one night. And that was not the case. I lost everything super quick again. I lost my job. I lost my clean and sober house. It was terrible. The only good thing that came from that time, I completed 2 quarters of school and I got my high school diploma finally after all that time.
well, congratulations. I mean, that's all that stuff is such little but big milestones. So one time, did you relapse back on meth, or was it alcohol that night, or meth?
Meth. So a week before my relapse on meth, I was with my boyfriend at the time. I was at a house party and I ended up having a drink of alcohol, like one little cup of alcohol. And they always say, like, I mean, alcohol leads to like a relapse, which I guess kind of true, because I mean I relapsed shortly after, so I can't say it's not true.
Sure. So you said you went pretty hard for 10 months, 10 and a half months. Was that basically you're just back out by yourself again?
So I called up this guy like Daniel that I knew, and I was like, "Hey, I'm being kicked out of my clean and sober house. I need someone like with a vehicle to help me get my stuff out. Are you available?" He's like, "Are you on drugs?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, and I have a lot, and I'll share with you." And then he was like, "Oh, I'm at a meeting right now. My sponsor says I shouldn't talk to you, and I'm not coming." And I'm like, "Okay, well, you know where I live if that changes." He showed up at my door 2 hours later, and we used pretty heavily for like a week leading up before I had to move out of my clean and sober house. And then he helped me move out. My church, which is Salvation Army Seattle Temple Corps, they helped put me up in a hotel for, I don't remember, a few days or a week or stuff because of my homeless situation, so I could figure it out, not knowing how unwell I was doing. They're just a good church that helps people, And so I was off the street for like a week, and then I ended up getting a room for rent with my friend Daniel, and then we used pretty heavily. And then I told him if he ever wanted to date me, because we were just like roommates and friends. I told him if he ever wanted to date me, he needed to go check into rehab and go to this program. So I checked him into the Salvation Army, and he went through that program, almost completed. He was there for over 5 months, and then I just continued to use, and then I ended up dating him. Now we're married and clean and sober and in a happily committed relationship. We're strong in our faith, strong in our church. We do a lot of outreach. We're part of like a church ministry team. So that's, I mean, what happened. But like during my 10 and a half months, I used harder than I had ever used before throughout like my whole history of using. Like it was unbelievable. And the fact is that I'm not like in prison or dead is just remarkable.
Yeah, it's and that was what, 4.5 years ago. I mean, now you see again, the Northwest was always a pretty heavy meth place, and that's always kind of stayed true. But again, you're starting to see those rises, in death rates these last 3 or 4 years up here in the Northwest of meth, fentanyl, especially than that last year and a half. When I talk to people, it's literally just life or death now. You think about addiction 20, 30 years ago, there was always that possibility of death, but with these drugs coming in and how potent they are and what's in them and how many times they're cut with God knows what, it's this one time, it's scary as hell. And everybody I meet in recovery, it's just tell them, thank God you're alive in recovery. So you're 4.5 years into recovery now. When you look back on your 8 or so years of addiction, I'm kind of going here into a different topic, but because you mentioned how the Salvation Army got you a hotel for a few weeks, all that kind of stuff. One, I kind of want to talk about maybe some more progressive policies here, if you're up for that. Because you look at Vancouver, BC, and they're pretty progressive in their dealing with people who have a substance use issue, like safe injection sites. They have hotels where people who use, they're not going to be evicted from them. I can't remember how they're funded. I think it's through some sort of tax or whatever it may be. But what are your takes on those? Because for me, again, I had that stigma. But what's funny is people want to reject the idea that drugs aren't out there. But again, it's if you talk to, I bet people just started going around to every neighborhood or every house in a neighborhood. One person in that family, I'm sure, will be affected by drugs somehow, some way or another. What are your takes on things of that nature where you're going through it? Because you mentioned you were living in the dirt, no house, no roof, anything, no tent. How much would have it helped you just to have a place, hypothetical 400 square feet, just to have a bed and a dry place to sleep at night, you could use or whatnot, and then on your own time get into rehab?
Yeah, so I think it would have been very beneficial. Like, I mean, it's a self-esteem thing and it's a security thing, right? So who knows? I mean, because I didn't have that experience, I can't say I would know the outcome one way or another. But why not put people up in a position where they at least have that choice, where they do feel good enough to apply for a job, and then the transition, the beautiful transition and story of recovery can happen a lot sooner. Like, why not set them up for that potential if we're able to? I think we have such a system in place that keeps people using, that keeps people criminals. And I don't know all the right answers, but
Yeah, because it seems like people with addiction, like, that they're, again, they're looking for a connection. And, so much of addiction is isolation and, not having those connections. And, you start one, for me, it's like a safe injection site. The statistics in Vancouver, BC are, I think this was about a year ago, 3 million plus injections, not one death. And for me, it's like, if you're living on the streets, I mean, why wouldn't you use? I mean, you're cold as hell. It's dirty. It's smelly. Your self-esteem is shot to shit basically. Why not? And for me, it's like, okay, now like you mentioned, I would love to know if there's a study out there that says, if we put X people into housing and they can still use, not with the worry of being kicked out, but how fast or how much quicker can they get into rehabilitation than living on the streets? And what's the ROI there? Because homeless camp sweeps, everything that goes on with paying these people to go do, clean up the trash, all that kind of stuff. I would love that because, like you mentioned, like, just hearing you, like, and seeing your face when you said you were just sleeping in the dirt, it was just like, dear God, and that's for 10 months. That's a long time. But, here you are, 4.5 years sober and happily married and doing amazing work. It just, what would you want to tell people going through their active addiction, or what do you tell people going through their active addiction?
yeah, I think the thing that's important is, I mean, you mentioned it, that like we all want like relationships. Like, if we're active in our using, active in our addiction, like it's about like lacking relationship. And I think it's really good to like keep in mind, especially like, I mean, like, this is a disease. Like, people don't choose to like suffer from this disease, and the stigma out there that this is a choice is incorrect. Like, I mean, it's just plain and simple incorrect. Like, if I were to relapse right now, I'm making that choice. But after I make that choice, like, it takes over. And people suffer with compulsive behaviors constantly. And it just happens that some people's is alcohol and drugs. But other people's compulsive behavior is pornography. Other people's compulsive behavior is sitting and watching TV, their favorite sitcoms. We have different compulsive behaviors, and who's to say one's healthier than another? I know people who work out to an unhealthy degree. I know people who quote scripture to an unhealthy degree. And that sounds pretty terrible, especially because I am a man of faith, that I'm saying that. But if you're not using it in the right way, if you're forming the way scripture is so you can judge others, you're not using it right.
No.
Like, you know, and and I have a lot of that in my life. I have a family dynamic that doesn't necessarily accept all aspects or understand, but that they use their lack of understanding to create hate. And like, I just think that if you're out there using, if you're suffering from like addiction, just don't lose hope. There's so much hope out there. There's so much relationship out there. Like if you can't find your relationship like with God right now, you can definitely find your relationship with people. And I think that housing for the homeless, and I actually think that safe injection sites that I wasn't super for in the beginning when I first heard of them, I think that is a safe place to create relationship, even if it's not with the kinds of people you need to surround yourself with in theory and stuff. I mean, you can find your greatest support. Some of my best support are people like who are other addicts. Like some of my closest relationships are other addicts and people who relapse who I still stay close to and like give them that love because they need that love.
Yeah, I was shocked too when I heard about safe injection sites. It's like, really? But then you start thinking about it and you have, professionally trained nurses and sometimes doctors in there, and again, those are people talking to someone going through what they're going through. And that relationship builds, think about going there every single day for just say 7, 8 months, not being judged. Wow, here I am taking drugs. And that person who's there to, potentially save my life is not judging me. They're there to help me, but just that common connection over time, 7, 8 months, and like you hear many stories going, wow, because of that, I want to get into rehab. Just very simple connections.
That changes something inside a person. It definitely
Yeah.
changes something inside.
And I want to talk about your faith, coming out of rehab and stuff. What has faith given you?
I mean, faith gives me my purpose. I felt like I had no purpose throughout like most of my life and until I reconnected and like really got like such a strong faith to God and believing that that is like my purpose is to be a good person, to do outreach, to spread my love of God. And it gives me a purpose. Like every single day I'm a different person because I get outside of myself and I'm helping others the way I believe Jesus would love others. And I do that to such a degree that like now I'm capable of not just being clean and sober, but I'm capable of standing up and protesting for social justice, for equality. And I'm part of a lot of different stuff that I believe is important. And that is because of my faith. That's tied to my faith. And a lot of people use their faith to like turn away from LGBTQ plus or whatever kind of thing they're trying to spread. And it blows my mind because I see it all differently than them.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, I know growing up, I went to Catholic school, my whole life. You're taught only man, woman, marriage, et cetera, so on. But then, it's like, I don't know when it was. It just kind of going, like, who cares? First of all, men women relationships are what 55% divorce. I mean, it's not the greatest numbers, and if you love someone, just go for it. I mean, I just don't know why people. I get, it's their opinion. It's how they were, raised or whatever it is. But life is too short. It's just love who you want to love.
Right. And I think there's such like a misconception out there, like on LGBTQ plus people. We're not all hoes. Like I'm just gonna say it. We're not all hoes. And me and my husband, like we have God as the head of our household. And our marriage, our relationship is underneath that relationship. And that's pretty powerful. And I mean, there's others in the community who are like that as well. And if being a hoe right now is your thing, hey, we're still gonna love you. Like, you know what I mean? Be safe, and we're gonna love you and show you a different way. I think what's important is that I get to example to people because I'm a Christian, because I'm in LGBTQ plus, and because I'm in recovery. Like I have a lot of pressure, but I get to example what that looks like to everybody and all sorts because I know a lot of my Christian family members are not understanding my LGBTQ plus community and not understanding my addiction recovery fellowship. And even though they're in denial because there's a lot of addiction through my family. But as long as I get to example that and like I can be loving through it all, like then I'm winning. And it's hard. It's hard to be loving all the time through that because there's some ugly hate out there.
Oh, for sure. What is your relationship now with your family?
So, I mean, I love every single one of my family members, but I mean, it's pretty hard because there's a lot of political stuff right now that plays into view, and there's some terrible things being said against like my community that, like, my mother and like my older sister, like they're believing a lot of QAnon conspiracies, like against the LGBTQ plus community. And then when my mom approached me a couple weeks ago about it, it was just ugly. I'm just like, we're not those terrible sick people like you want to like make us out to be. And it's really mind-blowing, and it's sad, but I'm gonna love them through it. I don't have to be my mom's best friend right now, and I told her that recently, and that's where that's at. As far as with my brother, the one who's 2 years older, the one who woke up and saw like my dad as a child, since I got clean over 4 years ago this time, like I've been trying to be a good support for him, and he's been homeless, and like he's been in and out of jails and mental hospitals and stuff like that, and I've just been trying to love him and show him through. I've taken him to church, and I've taken him to meetings, and I've shown up for him, and I've done a lot of stuff, but not trying to enable him. Like I wouldn't let him sleep at my place. That's my safe space, and he couldn't know where I live for a reason. And, we became so close that he went from hating me all my life to calling me his best friend right before he died. He actually died in September, unexpectedly. In jail, he died, but we talked almost every single day on the phone. And, that's really hard, but we became as close as we probably could be.
That's amazing. That's truly amazing. I mean, that's you're the definition, you're a great example of just forgiveness, the power of forgiveness and what it can do.
Thank you. And that's a testimony to my faith for sure. Because of my faith, I'm able to forgive people the way I do. And because me just being me, I am not forgiving. I am petty, but something inside of me has changed. And I think that's due to my faith, and I'm able to forgive people. It's really about seeing people where they're at. And I think that's why at first, like a lot of us are against like safe injection sites and stuff. We don't want to condone bad behavior. We don't want to condone something that we think could cause people to do more drugs and kill themselves. Like we don't want to condone that as a society. But really, if we look into it any further, we're going to see, and we're going to be, woken up to what's needed. Like it's about relationships, seeing people where they are at, seeing people where they're at, no matter what.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, about that, because again, it doesn't matter if it's in a safe injection site. People are going to still use, whether they're on the street, in their house, or whatever. They're still going to do it.
I would use anywhere. So if we can create like a safer space where they can form any kind of relationship, and there's like a nurse who's going to watch them, why not do that? We're going to use no matter what. And that's just going for anything like addiction, like you're going to use no matter what. So why not create like a relationship and something that can change someone's heart inside and maybe get them to a transition sooner.
Well, I hope people who listen to this podcast through the whole story, but really take away these last 5 minutes, because the way you speak about forgiveness and how you work at forgiveness, like you said, like yourself personally, you're petty, but because of your faith, you work to help forgive people. And that's a big thing. I think we need a lot of that now in our country. I mean, really, really, truly need that everywhere. So Dustin, I thank you for your time, for, being open, sharing your story. Again, I'm terribly sorry for everything you've been through, but seeing you now and just seeing you for the first time, meeting you for the first time, you look like you're in a wonderful place in your life and really helping others out. So that's truly remarkable.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, I will say one thing though, sharing my story is so just like anyone out there can get kind of hope from it and stuff like that. But also like, I'm not a victim. Like, even though like I've been in situations where I was a victim, I'm absolutely not a victim. Like there's a purpose and a reason that I had to experience that stuff, and it's transformed me into someone I would never be otherwise. And so I'm not a victim, like absolutely.
That's an incredible way to think about it, and a very good mindset. So thank you again. Thank you for your story. I know that's probably a lot to go through, but truly thank you. I know this will for sure connect with at least one person. So
then it's worth it. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dustin. You have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe in the storm.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. All right. Keep on doing what you're doing, and hopefully talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Henry Zunkel podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. If you would like to learn more about our nonprofit, please go to henryzunkel.org. As we say here at Henry Zunkel, you are loved, never judged.